Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Welcome back to our iRacing Pro Track Guide here in Xfinity Series. This week we're at Legacy Pocono Raceway. A very unique, very, I would say, tricky track. It's a track that requires a lot of discipline, which we'll go over, and how to navigate our angles and throttle manipulation and momentum at this track. So, first and foremost, I hope you guys had your happy holidays with your family. And by the time you probably watch this, you guys probably return back to start the new year as well. So hopefully we will start 2025 off with some of our goals that we want to achieve on iRacing, and maybe we're part of that. So, but kind of carry on to this video. This is a very unique track, right? This is something where a lot of drivers in our Xfinity Series has not had the fortune to race on. And for me, I've had a lot of success at this track that's transferred from the Coca-Cola series, and this is a tricky track to where you have to be disciplined, and that requires on your braking transitions. That requires when you get off the brake, and when you get back to the throttle. So to start that, turn one is going to be a significant point we'll go over, and just to preface this with some discussion with you guys. Turn one is usually not a corner we will adjust for. On past series races here, we would always be battling for turn two and turn three because that's a more flatter section of the track, specifically turn three. So turn one, the characteristics are really bumpy, really, really bumpy, the way you're going to have to give up some capability in turn one on your entry to just have some stability in the car. And I'm going to let this play out for the first lap, and so we can kind of go over it, and I will study the first lap with you guys after this. All right, I'm going to switch it to our driver perspective in the car, and we'll go over some actual things I'm looking at, things I'm trying to get the feel in the car, and the benefits of that, cons of a certain driving characteristic as well. So I'll let this play up towards turn one. Just for a reference point as well, when I'm in racing scenarios, there is some ability where I leave a little bit more, I would say, distance from the wall on the straightaways, right? I don't want to drive just completely up against the wall here. Reason is, I just don't want to add drag to the spoiler, but more importantly, I don't want to have some corrections on the straightaway. The closer I get to that wall, with as bumpy as this track is, even on the straightaways, it's quite bumpy where the wall is actually meeting to obviously the pavement here, asphalt, and closer I get to the wall, incorrect avenue of actually hitting a bump may actually bring me closer to the wall, depending on how much wheel input I have. So I find a lot of success. I found a lot of success in the years past running this track when you're just straddling the seam where the left front's on top of it or just to the left of it. And more often than not, why that is the case is because you're actually getting the splitter lower to the track, getting it lower through the air, so you're actually having a lot better push, obviously, and momentum on a straightaway than anything. So just understand that. That's why you're going to see me veer off a little bit more distance on the straightaways. I'll exit as close as I can on maxing my exit momentum and angle to the wall, I'll reach the wall, obviously without touching it, but get as close as I can without sacrificing momentum. And then I'll start deviating away from it about 10-15% down each straightaway. So let's get to our turn one here. I'm going to break this down slow-mo, and I'll play it at full speed after this so you guys can see the perspective in turn one. So you're going to see this zone here. You're going to see, obviously, at this moment, the windshield brace is in the way, but this is your one marker with a Pepsi logo getting into turn one. And you can see I'm actually starting a little bit more of a leftward trend, loading the front end up before I start lifting off the gas and transition to the brake. This zone here is very important. You know, this Pocono sign on the wall. And that should be your reference point to have the car transition to turning left before you reach the end of it. Now, the rate and radius that you carry with the steering wheel input is obviously more driver induced. So when we cover this, we got to make sure we're actually getting to our compression of one correctly. Where we're crossing these seams is very important. And leading into this point, this bump that we hit initially after we fully compress here, once we cross this second lowest seam before we get to this lowest seam before the curbing, that is a reference point I'll give you guys that is very important at this track. And how you load the brake pedal, how much pressure you have on the brake pedal is very important to not push too much to where you have to release that brake pedal and get back onto it too heavy once you're already consistently trying to keep the radius of this corner. So let's slow this down, lifting before the Pocono sign, braking, turning into the corner, obviously with as limited brake pedal as I can to stop this for a moment. I don't like to exceed 20% initially into this turn one zone until I know I'm carrying my entry speed like I need to. This turn away from the wall in turn one and to this second seam that you seeing me highlight on the screen here is important to make sure you got your entry speed correct. Make sure you're not overslowing it, because if you're overslowing it, more often than not, you're going to actually hit the splitter more often and more abruptly, more profoundly. And that's going to get you off center and keeping the angle that you need to wrap into your full compression and carrying it all the way to the center of one. So if you guys need a reference point, let's just say this is about 10% through cornering here at your full compression. You can see how I'm getting ready to get off the brake pedal just a little bit more through these bumps. And this turn one, the bumpiest section of the track. It is really unique, has a lot of character to it, and the reason is because how profound these bumps are, how tall these bumps are, and what you need to do as a driver to recover from them is very important to fix. So you can see, pretty limited brake pedal. I'm getting off the pedal just to try to get some front capability back. Now I got all this front capability. You see I have a lot of rolling distance here in this corner. You're going to have that from first lap all the way to your lap 20, 25, 30 into a run. So remember that. Very important to remember that you got to have some rolling capability here and not to jump to partial throttle too heavy. You can see how I'm working to a fixed percentage around 50%, and I'm still keeping half the car to a quarter of a car with below this seam. There's a lot of capability in this lane. Why that is because you have a lot of ability to wrap the center to mid-exit with some confidence, some grip, to where you're not having to take some momentum out, but instead you're actually creating momentum, and you have a lot better ability with the steering wheel to open up for your exit of one. So let's slow this down. Quarter of the car is still there. By the time I start crossing this seam, you can barely see it now. I'm getting ready to cross this left front and almost timing it to where I'm hitting this T in the turn one, red lettering on the wall, to where I'm crossing this seam. I'm going to repeat that again. Already in 100% throttle, but I'm making sure I'm going to start exiting as much as I can, maxing the momentum I have in, distance, to make sure I'm not having to scrub speed off with shaping the wheel to the left, getting the car freer at this point, but instead just keep it neutral to where I'm going to cross the seam now. So Now maximizing this angle. Obviously, these seams are pretty courteous in slipping the rear if you're just too erratic with steering wheel. So I'm going to back this up again, and we're going to do this at full speed so you guys can see the gravity of it. All right, so that line I would say is a very rewarding line. So we're not into the splitter as much. Just to reiterate, you will have splitter contact in turn one. That is something we will have to feel and just accept. The level of how aggressive that is can be differentiated by which option of setup that you want, and then factoring in some adjustments that we need later on to run. The reason is you have so much bumps in a turn one is turn three is really flat. So if we clear those bumps in a one with our splitter, where we have the shocks and springs where we need them for just turn one solely, the splitter is going to be too high for our tunnel turn here, and will also be too high in turn three, the flattest section of the track. So we got to keep some downforce somewhere. And as low speeds we have to sacrifice something in some lap time at this track because of how different these three corners are. So let's kind of carry on to our turn two, which is also known as the tunnel turn. Really unique corner as well. Really disciplined corner in how you need to attack your straight line braking phase, your turn in phase, and when to trail off that brake. Because it is very important to get as much as you can to the left on this curbing, but even more important to where you're timing getting to that curbing with the steering angle, not too much speed, and then also not too much throttle or turn, pushing a tight condition into the car. So let's break this down on our entry. We're going to get a little bit closer here. So very hard to see at speed, at real time, live speed. You'll see this Pepsi sign once again in a break of these trees. But even more so, that should be a good reference point for you to start lifting and transitioning to some straight line braking characteristics, but also turning away just a hair before this safer barrier starts going inward towards this turn. So why that is important is because you got to make sure you're slowing up enough to turn for this corner entry. You will have some conditions of being tight, being loose, but more often than not, on new tires and old tires, you'll have just a tiny bit of snugness to this car because of this characteristic of this corner. Let's break this down, turning in at the safer barrier now, partial brake, and what we talked about is straight line braking. You can see how straight line braking is a good quality. Now I'm barely turning the wheel with obviously some braking induced to it. Very, very little wheel movement just to get this car pointed down to the bottom here. Now you'll see I'm in a rolling phase once again. I'm angling myself to this curb. I'm crossing this seam, adding a little bit more wheel input, but as I cross that seam, I don't really have a lot more capability in the front tires. And if I did, I'm going to start almost cutting this curbing. So now my mentality is, where am I going to pick up partial throttle? How heavy of a rate of throttle do I need to add? And just a little bit of throttle is going to go a long way in balancing that car towards the snug side now. So, and the reason is because you change the dynamic attributes of the car. Your partial throttle, you're adding a little bit more rear squat at that partial throttle and lifting the nose up. So here, a little bit of Pocono sign. You see a little bit discolored, difference between this light gray to the darker gray. Let's slow this up even more. And at that Pocono sign is where I get to my initial throttle. Now I got the capability here that I need. And now I'm going to time when I need to get off this curb and obviously not clip it. And it is going to be very simple when you're going to get off that curb is as soon as this ends, this dark patch ends. And if you want to have a better reference point for the wall, use the Pocono, where the P on the Pocono is the last sector and marker I would use in staying pinned to this curbing. Because at that point, now you're going to be sacrificing your 100% throttle moment. That is where on new tires your 100% throttle moment should be. And if you feel like you're tight in this section, more often than not, you're carrying too much speed, not getting the right angle down to that curbing at the right point and the right timing to stay on it. So remember that very important quality to fix and work on your craft at this track, because a lot of drivers will overdrive that. And if you can refine this entry and all the way through this initial throttle to full 100% throttle moment, you will have a lot better characteristic in creating that momentum instead of stagnating that momentum, especially for your tunnel turn exit. So remember that. This track is not going to have the perfect handling. It's not going to have the absolute pace that we want. We want to have some downforce. We want to have some stability. So if we are just a tick towards the free side, more often than not, that is a good quality. We just got to find out how we can tame our tunnel turn and turn 3 if we're that free. And more often than not, if we're too free in turn 1, that's a good quality for us, again, to have for turn 2 and turn 3 here. Now to break down turn 3 here. Let's slow this up. You'll also see this sign here, Pepsi 1 sign, and you'll see this logo. I start lifting newer tires, a little bit older tires as well, where I need to place my corner radius and be the most sharp I can to cut down to the curbing of turn 3. And that is very important to remember, because how you get on your entry to turn 3 is dictated about your timing of when you're rolling off 100% throttle to 0% throttle. There's multiple different ways you can actually attack this entry. You can lift to 50% after this logo and then completely dump that throttle to 0 and then have all that capability with the front to turn in. But you also have to induce some braking qualities into this track for turn 3. So all that is very important to time. And let's do this at slow speed so you can see when I'm turning in at that 1 sign. Let's back this up again. Pepsi 1 sign. I'm turning away from the wall just before it. Doesn't mean I'm lifting. Now I'm lifting well into the corner and transitioning to the brake just to help slow myself down and set the entry up a little bit better. Limited brake pedal, much like turn 1. It's not like turn 2, it's much like turn 1. And finding when to get off this rolling, phase to my rolling phase, and timing where to get off that brake to create some front capability still. I don't want to add more brake, slow this actual angle down, because if I slow it down, now I'm just going to drive on top of this curbing. So really important to match your entry speed and match it to where you actually got the angle, being proactive enough as a driver to continue wrapping and time where you get to this curbing. Now I'm in my rolling phase quite heavily, past the Pocono 3 sign. I'll rewind this a little bit. This is past the Pocono turn 3 sign. By the time I get to my rolling phase, this whole car, the right rear now, is completely below this seam. And now I get to my partial throttle well at the Pocono sign in the center of turn 3. You can't see it here, but I'm going to back it up once again. Here's the Pocono sign. Let's reference that again. New tires. I'm getting back to my partial throttle now. You can see I'm not 100% throttle either. I'm making sure I'm not pushing a tight condition instantly when I return back to the throttle. Very important quality to remember. It's almost like you're at Phoenix, in the flatter section of turns 1 and 2. You don't want to push the throttle too heavy initially and get yourself offline, and when you have to return back off and lighten your foot off on the gas pedal. So breaking this down, now I'm timing where I need to get to 100% throttle. You can create a push loose in this section of the track. It's majority of it's going to happen, so don't be afraid that if you have a little bit of a push, just make sure you're not creating too heavy of a push for your exit of 3 here. I'm going to back this up to the tunnel turn at speed and for turn 3 here. once we get there, and then we'll cover our lap 10 at cockpit view, and then we'll do our lap 15 or 20 at chase view. Alright, we got a lot of grip, obviously, first lap. So you're going to have a lot of potential, I would say, the first 2 laps of a run. Then you're going to start recognizing how much grip we don't have. So let's go to our lap 10, about a second fall off at 10. So I'm going to let this play at full speed once again so you guys can visually see some differences, how we need to manage this track. You can see a difference already I had compared to the first lap in this video. I actually have a little bit more of a shallower entry as far as when I'm crossing that seam, and I'm putting the whole car in turn 1 below the seam. Once again, not overdriving exit, trying to maximize my momentum, trying not to scrub speed with steering wheel movement and micro adjustments. Rolling phase now, partial throttle, staying partial throttle, and timing 100% throttle moment. Probably a good 200 feet later than I could on the first lap. So something to, again, remember how that's going to change. You're going to be in racing scenarios. You're obviously going to have some tighter qualities when you're behind some drivers because it's harder to see and you get thrown around a lot more. So you got to be, you don't have to be tense. Don't be too tense in the wheel, but you got to be pretty methodical, pretty precise on your entry phase and when you're timing to get off the brake completely, because that is all your momentum, you know, you're going to carry to where into the center portions to where you can actually then find your point to create your full momentum for the rest of the lap. So let's go to our lap 20 here. I like to go to on our cockpit view and in-car, and then we'll look at it in chase perspective as well. Slowing it down. Still a lot of braking. Getting into this compression zone now. I've actually released the brake pedal a little bit. Trying to make sure I'm not inducing too much abrupt changes to the splitter. Keeping the car naturally a little bit above the seam in a rolling phase now. Now we'll play this at speed. I'm just straddling the seam, getting the left front below it. And why that helps is if that seam, if you cross it with the left front, you're going to have a little bit more potential grip. You could be half a lane lower, you can feel all that grip as well. But for me, at this stage of a run, I want to make sure my lap is creating as much speed as I can. Meaning, I've minimized my high-speed momentum loss. Now, I'm trying to start gaining that high speed back, right? So this helps me with a little bit less micro corrections and helps me stabilize the car in partial throttle stage all the way to my full throttle moment and helping me get off the corner. So especially for turn 1, that's a good reference point to use, good mindset to use. Make sure you got your entry as stable as you can more often than, you know, just hitting the splitter to hit the splitter. So let's use this again, slowing it down, turn into the corner, getting off the brake relatively now, and partial throttle a lot earlier. Reason being is now we have some speed loss compared to our new tires. So that's requiring us to make some time back for our partial throttle. And we want to make sure I got the car balanced, got it to the right rear at the right point so we can actually create some lap time. Turn 3 again. You actually notice a little difference. I'm turning at the wall, and I'm getting ready to turn away again at that one Pepsi logo on the wall or outside the catch fence. A little bit of brake, slowing it down. Crossing this seam, gonna be pretty important again. Gonna get off that brake once I get closer to that curbing. Pocono logo, partial throttle, staying in partial throttle a little bit longer like I did on lap 15 compared to lap 1. Now you're just maximizing the lap here. So show this one more time at full speed for a lap in chase perspective. And then we'll give you some final thoughts here. At about relatively 1.7, 1.8 seconds of fall off in 20 laps, by the way. You can just see how much movement we have at this track. It's astronomical, like you would see at Rockingham on entry to some of these corners. Like you would see at Rockingham in turn 3, and even in the center of 3 and 4. It's pretty similar in how bumpy turn 1 is in Legacy Pocono. All right, so that's chase view on lap 20. And some questions I know some will have, and this is why this is part of the final thoughts here, is downshifting. When to time your downshift. When to downshift. Is it advantageous? Is it, a disadvantage? So we have 3 gear options this week. It is a 350, 355, and a 356. Our options are going to have the 356 in it. And a 350 can be beneficial as well. I haven't seen a lot of benefit outside of shifting just in downshifting to first in turn 1 and turn 3. I would not think about downshifting in a tunnel turn at all. Where you're going to time your downshift is probably going to be better with the 350 option, okay? And the reason being because you have a little bit more pull off the corners, and you won't have to upshift the fourth as early as you would, say, the 55 gear or the 56 gear. You'll actually be able to time it probably 150 feet later to 200 feet later than you would with those other 2 gears. So if you guys want to experiment, please try the 350 gear. No problem in trying it. I think it's a good benefit to have later into a run, but also to the same point, you're going to sacrifice a little bit of center speed doing that. And now to correlate where to time your downshift at, I would definitely time your downshift more towards this is a percentage through corner in here. I would time your downshift towards the 40% mark to the 50% mark in corner of turn 1, and the same thing for turn 3. Now, you can probably do it about 5% earlier, and where you should time it is when you're almost getting completely off the brake pedal into your rolling phase of the corner. So that way you're not having to induce a lot of torque into the car, to the rear axle, for one, and at the wrong moment when you're actually crossing over a bump, specifically for turn 1 and turn 3. So time that. We'll work towards that if we need to, but that's some advice I would give you towards downshifting at this track. Going to be better focused towards a 350 gear, no doubt, and having that reward. And I think it was a pretty productive test. I enjoyed testing this track and definitely enjoyed running it. Brought back a lot of memories. So I enjoyed testing this and hope to see you guys there and having a good week with us at TCSP. And if you guys have any other further questions, please reach out. Just send just a DM away or a tag away from answering anything you guys have. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and hopefully you guys are bringing in a new year, had a happy Christmas as well, and enjoyed the holidays with your family and loved ones. So appreciate you guys tuning in.